Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Hope everybody's getting ready for a wonderful weekend. We're going to do what we do, which is take a look at these viewer submitted videos we've got here today. If you're interested in submitting your videos and being eligible to participate in Form Check Friday, go ahead and click the link on the screen right now, and that will explain all of our entry requirements. Let's dive on in here. We're going to start off with Roman. Now, Roman, we left off last episode with Roman here. He's so he mentioned that this is a single at 245 after missing 5 attempts at 255. So, Roman, this tells me a lot about how we're training right now. And don't miss 5 attempts at a lift and then lower it by 10 pounds and grind out a set at an absolute 10 RP. Let's spend more time training, practicing, using weights where we can cultivate good habits, skill, appropriate technique. I think there's a lot to be learned there. And you mentioned here that you're 16, so you're a young guy. And honestly, the earlier in your career you can learn to train, you can learn to kind of have a good mental approach to training, the longer you're going to be able to do this and the further you're going to be able to go with it all. So let's take that into consideration when you're coming into these training sessions. Don't worry about trying to max out all the time. You don't need to. So that being said, let's start looking at the actual technique here. So number one thing I'm noticing is this unracking. We call this out a lot, but when you're unracking, your shoulders are rolling forwards. We want to try to unrack with the elbows. We've got a video specifically about this. Maybe we'll get it linked in the description. Upper back tight, unrack with the elbows, pull the bar out. Don't let the shoulder go forward with it. Now, this is one of the most yeeted descents I've maybe seen in a while. You literally just dive bomb that thing into your chest and pray. That's not really how we want to be descending. We want to be trying to descend with as much speed as we can control. And we can see from how this impacts your chest, we don't have a lot of control on it. So the descent here, a lot of things wrong with that. You can see the bar kind of bounces like this off the chest. The elbows end up kind of out behind the bar. And I think that we need to work on developing some control, some patience in the descent, and also, maybe a bit of a lighter touch. Now when we go to press, the shoulders are shrugging up further from their position that was already lost during the unrack, and that causes the bar to go out this way before we're able to continue through with the rest of the press. Butt stays down, which is good. Bar path is actually okay on the way up, but there's a lot of things that happen before the press on the way up that need to be dialed in. So dial the load back, dial the weight back a little bit, my man. You have so much time to progress and so much time to get really, really good at this stuff. Eat, sleep, slow your training down a little bit. Don't try to max out 6 times in a row. And, you can go places. You can get strong, you can get big, you can get jacked, and do all those things that you want to do with training. Please keep it up. I encourage that always when I see lifters your age submitting videos. Don't take this as discouragement. If anything, the goal here is to try to help you be better for longer within the sport should you choose to compete. Next, we have Jason. Jason's been powerlifting for 9 months. He says this is around 80%, and he's got some tall guy problems. So not only tall guy, but he looks pretty well filled out. He's probably I don't even know. I can't guess at weight. I'm not super good at it, but I would guess 240, 250 here. Pretty jacked dude. Nice tattoos. I'm good with this. Anyways, I like a lot about the deadlift. I think that the stance is probably the first thing that I would approach or try to look at, is maybe narrow this stance a little bit. And I think if we narrow the stance, that'll allow you a little bit more sort of knees out concept. It's going to allow you to externally rotate at the hip a little bit, which is in turn going to allow you to get that last little bit of back extension, which I think is pretty much the only thing we're missing. So I think a bit of a narrower stance will allow you a better start position, and I think that'll go a long ways. I don't think there's really anything wrong with your deadlift per se, but that would be an avenue I would go down to try to, explore if there is a way we can make it a little bit more efficient. All right. Eric, he's been lifting since he was 16. He's 23 now. At one point, he says he squatted 227.5 kilos, 500 pounds in competition. Over the last year or so, he says he's worked on body composition. He's lost 20 pounds, and his squat, he says, has changed. So he's worried about running into a bit of a squat morning pattern, and wants to know, sort of what he can do to combat that. And when we say squat morning, what we're talking about is the way his knees come back and his hips shoot up there a little bit. Number one, I think that's partly from maybe a bit of a lack of depth. Like, we might be able to go a little deeper, get a little bit more stretch reflex, and be a bit more comfortable, a bit smoother out of the bottom there. The other big thing is I would maybe, you got a great rack for this with that sort of, like, everybody calls it west side hole spacing, but yeah, it's a Rogar 3 rack. So if we can move these pins up a little bit and do some pin squats where in the bottom position you're actually coming to a bit of a rest on the pins, a lot of the times that is sort of an exercise that's going to fix a lot of those faults in terms of the squat morning. So if we're running into that, pin squats are always a great go-to if you want to come at it from an exercise prescription standpoint, which I feel like is a really smart way to come at a lot of technical deficiencies, because basically it allows you to auto-regulate. So you're going to be able to tell what feels good, what doesn't feel good. Ideally, that will apply over to your comp squat. Now there's a little bit of an issue sometimes with transference, but in theory anyways, that's probably one of the best ways that you can kind of figure things out. Now, we do see a little bit of a lapse of upper back tightness. That bar kind of rolls just a little bit, and the little like pop off your back at the top, I think might be making that worse as the set goes on, right? You're kind of like jerking the bar off your back. Keep that pulled down tight into your back. Keep it locked. And I mean, more or less, when you come out of the bottom of the squat, if you're running into the squat morning, think about putting some pressure on your 4 feet, your 4 foot, like your big toe, the ball of your foot. Think about driving those knees forward out of the hole, not necessarily pushing them more forward on the way down, but think about driving them forward as you begin your ascent. And obviously the goal is not to see the knees move forward, but it's to counteract the natural tendency to pull them back. And maybe some front squats, high bar squats, some more sort of like quad centric type squatting. If you have, I don't know what other equipment you have access to, but single leg work is great for kind of developing some more quad musculature in a lot of cases. And more or less when we see this fault, oftentimes from a supplemental exercise or like a bodybuilding exercise standpoint, we can get into the quads. A lot of times that can help a little bit. So up next, we got Jayden. He's benching. Jayden says he's 17 years old and benches 345 pounds, which to me is nuts. I wish I benched anything close to that when I was 17 years old. That was an absolute balls to the wall grinder, but hey man, like very football style bench, almost like we saw Roman here earlier. So probably going to say a lot of the same things in terms of training longevity, approaching your training because this looks like a football style bench, like it's generally what you would see in like a weight room for a bunch of high school athletes or varsity athletes even training to be football players. I'm going to approach this with maybe like a bit of a football analogy. Now, my knowledge of team sports is incredibly limited, so bear with me here. But if you want to practice certain aspects of football now, whether you're a quarterback or a receiver, you want to run your passing plays and patterns and stuff, you're not going to do that at full all-out speed with all of the other variables involved that you would see on the field every single time. What you're going to do is you're going to break that down to its components. You're going to practice it with a lower intensity so that you can get better skilled at performing that task. So I want people to start conceptualizing powerlifting from a similar standpoint, wherein we need to develop this skill of lifting as much as we need to develop the strength. Regardless of how, not technical this is, at 17 years old, to bench 345 is pretty impressive. That's awesome. Good for you. But I think if you have a passion for lifting, you need to approach that from a skills standpoint. You need to practice with submaximal intensities. And there are a lot of technical things you need to work on, right? Like we see the foot pickup right here. which tells me that we're not really using leg drive very effectively. You know, we see the knees kind of cave in more or less. So let's tackle leg drive first. So when you're pressing, I want you to push through your feet. I want you to think about using your feet to push yourself back up the bench, push your chest up. Now I'm pretty sure we probably see the butt. Well, maybe we don't see the butt come up off the bench. Good on you for that. I mean, it might be shaky. You might be able to see some daylight from the side there. But yeah, I mean, I think leg drive is one thing we can definitely work on. We're also, it's okay on the descent. There's no control in the chest. And I'm guessing if we could see the shoulders as you press, we're going to see this. That's why the bar comes out here and we have to kind of like get back under it to finish the press. So you mentioned in your email that a lot of people tell you should widen your grip. I think if your goal is powerlifting and bench pressing as much weight as you can, you're probably going to want to start playing with the wider grip. Probably going to want to start working your grip out a little bit. Now, I wouldn't just say like automatically go to like first finger on the rings, widen it up as much as possible. But you know, go like one finger at a time, a little bit wider, a little bit wider, a little bit wider. See at what point you're most comfortable with the movement. The other things I would work on are going to be control on the chest. So perhaps some long pause stuff, perhaps some pin presses. And again, we have a really nice piece of equipment here. We can adjust these pins, come down, rest gently on the pins and press from a dead stop. It's going to help you build a lot more strength off the chest using a little bit of an isometric, or use a little bit of an isometric and do some long pause work or any kind of pause on the chest. So we're emphasizing that part of the range of motion where we're weakest right now and spending some time there using an isometric contraction to strengthen that joint angle, and then ideally getting better off the chest, developing control, developing strength. So number of things to come at this from. Super impressive, but think about how you need to develop the bench as a skill, not just from a strength standpoint. All right, Leander, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, man. 22 years old, lifting for 3.5 years. Says he had some hamstring and lower back pain, switched to sumo. And he claims he's got bad flexibility, but stretches every day. And he wants to know how to improve. So it doesn't look to me like you have bad flexibility. I don't think there's really much wrong with this position. I think you could allow your knees forward a little bit more. And I go back and forth on this, and it depends on the athlete. Some people need to keep their knees back more. Some people need to allow their knees forward more. I cue different athletes differently based on their different issues. Imagine that. Imagine using critical thinking instead of just thinking that one cue is good for everybody. Anyways, I digress. One thing that often helps people is getting a little bit of extension in the low back, a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt, and yes, that is something I recommend to most people. However, that's not the be-all, end-all. I have clients and lifters who deadlift sumo with a rounded back and do so very successfully and injury-free. But as somebody who's sort of just getting used to sumo, I would definitely try and see if there are merits for you of getting into more of an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, when I talk about anterior pelvic tilt, we look at the hips. We'll kind of draw a crude diagram of the hips here. Now, imagine the hips are filled with water. And imagine this is the front of your body and this is the back of your body. Anterior pelvic tilt refers to the anterior side, the front side. Anterior pelvic tilt means tilting the pelvis such that the water is going to fall out of the front. So, tilting your pelvis this way is going to create a little bit of extension in the back. And in a lot of cases, that can be a good mechanic or a good way of bracing for the sumo deadlift. Some people are going to get a lot more out of being very neutral. Some people are going to get more out of being a little bit posteriorly tilted, right? Having this little bit of spinal flexion. You know, if this is the shoulder joint coming down to the bar, whatever. Terrible illustrations, but you get the point. Anyways, there are a number of different ways to approach this, but I would recommend, based on the fact that you're in a little bit of posterior tilt right now, right? Water's going to fall out the posterior side. I would recommend trying a bit more of a neutral position or even an anteriorly tilted position and seeing if that helps. Now, the other thing I'm seeing here is the toes are really, really far pointed out. You could probably bring those in a little bit and think, okay, the angle of the femur, we want more or less in line with the toes. And it just helps us create this sort of like stacked joint position, which again, in most cases is probably preferable. Here, I think we're pushing the knees out really hard. And I think that's a commonly overused cue in the sumo deadlift is like, oh, drive your knees out, get your hips super close to the bar. But what ends up happening is the knees go out way too far. We end up dumping the pelvis underneath, and then we lose some of the potential for creating a different style of bracing. So sometimes that bracing is preferable. Sometimes it is not. But those are the things I would investigate if I were you, Leander. All right, now we have George. George has been squatting, or rather powerlifting, for 13 years, which is awesome. Stoked to see you doing it, man. He says he's a little bit worried about his squat morning and back tightness. He says he's got some pretty common faults that he sees around or sees a lot of places on the internet, and wants to know what he can do to fix it. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this video play out. I'm going to sign off for today, and we're going to be back next week, starting with George. Now, if you have any critiques or criticisms that you can use to help George, go ahead and leave in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see y'all next week for Form Check Friday. Peace.